Hi guys, in today's video we will cover every core Vue concept, the whole reactivity system, every directive, the composition API, teleport, suspense, KeepAlive, and the compiler tricks that make Vue fast by default. Basics to advance in one map. We will cover 73 concepts across 12 sections, plus a quick tour of the ecosystem. And I will give you a full standalone explanation for every single one of those concepts. First, the mental model, the handful of ideas that make everything else in Vue click right away, and honestly, it feels different from how React does the same job. Stop telling the browser how to update the page. In plain JavaScript, you manually create and update DOM nodes, step by step. Vue flips it. You describe what the DOM should look like for the current state in a template, and Vue keeps it in sync for you. You write the destination, not the directions. That's declarative rendering. Fine-grained reactivity. This is the thing React can't do. Change one piece of state in Vue and only the exact DOM node that depends on it will update. Nothing else reruns. Vue tracks dependencies at the property level, not the component level. 5 bindings, 1 changed value, 1 node flashes. That's the precision in the whole engine. Virtual DOM and the compiler. Vue compiler already knows what's about to change. There's still a virtual DOM under the hood, but Vue's compiler pre-analyzes your template and tags exactly which part can actually change. Static content gets skipped entirely at runtime. No diffing needed. It's not guessing at update time, it already knows from build time. Single file components compose. Vue apps are basically Lego, one file at a time. Every piece of UI is a Vue file, a single file component. You nest small ones inside bigger ones, a button inside a card inside the page. Build tiny self-contained pieces, snap them together, and you got a whole app, similar to React. Now the building blocks, the single file component and the template syntax you will type every single day. Single file components. One file, 3 jobs. A Vue file bundles a template for markup, a script setup for logic, and a style scope that only touches this component's elements. No hunting across 3 separate files for one piece of UI. Everything a component needs lives together in one place. Interpolation. The simplest thing in Vue is also the most used. Double curly braces drop any JavaScript expression straight into your text content. A variable, some math, a function call. 2 + 2 just renders 4 and updates automatically the moment the underlying value changes. It's the first thing every Vue developer learns. Attribute bindings. Static HTML attributes get boring fast. vbind, or its shorthand, just a colon, binds an attribute to a real JavaScript expression instead of fixed string. $src with avatar URL swaps the image the instant avatar URL changes. Basically, every dynamic attribute in a Vue app goes through this one directive. Class and style bindings. Toggling a CSS class shouldn't need jQuery. Pass an object to class with active is active, and Vue adds or removes that class reactively based on the boolean. Same idea for style with inline styles. No manually class list add or remove anywhere. Change the state, the class follows automatically. Conditional rendering. VueIf and VueShow look the same, but they are not. VueIf removes the element from the DOM entirely when false, real cost to toggle, 0 cost when hidden. VueShow just flips CSS display none. The element's always there, cheap to toggle, cost a bit upfront, pick based on how often it flips. List rendering, the #1 Vue beginner bug. Vue for loops over an array in your template, and Vue wants a stable key on each item to track its identity across updates. Skip the key and reordering the list scrambles state onto the wrong rows. Always give it a real unique key, never the array index. Handling clicks in Vue is really fast. Click, or the long form VueOnClick, wires up a handler directly in the template. Modifiers chain write on prevent replace a manual event prevent default. Stop replace stop propagation. Form submit prevent on submit, that's a whole form handled in one line. There is no single right way to style a Vue component. Style scoped auto-scopes your CSS to just this component. CSS modules give you hashed class names. Deep function lets you reach into a child scope styles, and vbind inside styles lets a JavaScript value drive real CSS directly. Pick what fits you the best. Reactivity Fundamentals. This is where Vue comes alive. The reactivity system is the single idea everything else in this video builds on top of. Ref function. The function that makes Vue reactive. Ref wraps any value, like a number, a string, an object, in a reactive box with a value property. Change value and everything that reads it updates automatically. For example, with const count ref 0 and the count value. That's the single most important function you will use in Vue. Why does value disappear in some places? Inside script you will always need value to read or write a ref, but inside the template Vue automatically unwraps it for you. You just write count, no value needed. Same ref, two contexts, one small rule that trips up almost every beginner once. The other way to make something reactive. Reactive wraps a whole object in a reactive proxy. You access its property directly, no with value anywhere. With the code that we have here, we're gonna update UI automatically, every click. Great for grouped state, you will always reach into a whole object. Which one should you actually use? Ref works on anything and survives reassignment. Swap the whole value and it's still tracked. Reactive only wraps object. And if you reassign the whole variable, the reactive link snaps and stops working. That's exactly why most Vue codebases default to ref for everything. Destructuring a reactive object can silently break your app. Pull properties of a reactive object with plain JavaScript destructuring, and you copy out that. No reactive values, the connection is gone. To ref, destructures it into individual ref without servering that link. Different tool, same object. Reactivity intact either way. How does Vue actually know what changed? Under the hood, your reactive data is wrapped in a real JavaScript proxy. Reading a property inside a render or effect registers it as a dependency. Writing to that property notifies exactly the effect that read it. Nothing more, nothing less. That's the whole trick. Vue and React solve the same problem completely different. React reruns your entire component function on any state change, then divs the result to find what to update. Vue tracks dependencies per property from the start and updates only the exact DOM nodes that depend on the change value. Same goal, opposite strategy. Forms are where reactivity meets the real world. Here's how Vue handles two-way binding and a handful of directives you'll reach for less often, but need to recognize. Two-way binding, one directive. VModel is double.value and input wired together automatically. Type in the input your state updates. Update the state in code, the input reflects it. Input with VModel name, that's it. That's genuinely the whole two-way binding story for a native form field. 3 tiny tweaks that save you a lot of code. Lazy syncs on the change event instead of every keystroke. Number automatically casts the input string value to a number, and trim strips leading and trailing white spaces. With, for example, VModel number trim age, all 3 stacks, 0 extra JavaScript required. VHTML is the directive that can open a security hole. VHTML renders a string as actual HTML, bold tags, links, whatever is in the string, instead of showing it as escape text. Powerful for trusted content like CMS, dangerous for anything user-generated. VHTML is a textbook cross-site scripting vulnerability. 3 directives you will use maybe once a year. Vue pre skips complying a block entirely. You literally see row curly braces on screen. VueUse renders content once and never touches it again. even if its data changes. Vue cloak hides an uncompiled template so you'll never flash raw mustache syntax before Vue loads. A performance escape hatch built right into the template. Vue memos keeps re-rendering that chunk of template unless one of the listed values actually changed. It's a targeted tool for huge lists where re-rendering every row on every update gets expensive, not something you reach for by default. Every Vue directive follows the exact same shape, with Vue directive argument modifier, a name and optional argument after a colon. Optional modifiers chained with dots. Vue on clicks and stop breaks down into event handling. The click event stop propagation. Once this pattern clicks, every directive in Vue reads the same way. Now component communication. How a parent talks down to a child and how a child talks back up. How a Vue component declares its inputs. defineProps declares exactly what the props a script setup component accepts. It's a compiler macro, meaning it complies away completely. No import required. Pass label new from a parent and it flows straight into props label inside the child. That's the whole contract. Catch prop bugs before they hit production. Declare props as an object instead of plain array, and you get the type checking, required flags, default values, and customer validator functions. All enforced in development. Pass the wrong type and Vue warns you in the console immediately, not free components downstream. Never do this to a prop. Props flow one direction, parent to a child, and they are read only. Mutate one directly and Vue warns you in the console. It's a sign your architecture fighting the framework. Need a local working copy? Create your own state, seeded from the props initial value. A component's public API declared upfront. With defineEmits declares exactly which custom events a component can send it to parent, like a contract listing everything it's allowed to say. It's a mirror image of defineProps, but props are the inputs, emits are the outputs. How a child talks back to its parent. Call that declared emit, function with an event name and an optional payload. The parent listens for it with save handled safe. Click a button and event its data fly upward. The parent's handle catches it, that's the whole loop. Here's what VueModel actually does behind the scenes. On a component, it's a sugar for accepting a model value prop and emitting update model value when it changes. The child binds value model value and input emit. That prop down, emit up, pairing it's the manual version. And it's exactly what the sugar hides. 6 lines of boilerplate just become one. defineModel collapses that entire manual prop plus emit pairing into a single line. Need a second bound value? Name it defineModel title. Pairs with VueModel title on the parent. Multiple two-way bindings, minimal ceremony. Slots are how a component accepts content from the outside. Views answer the React's children, but with a lot of more power. How do you pass content into a component? Whatever you put between a component's opening and the closing tags gets rendered wherever the component places slot. Add the fallback content inside the slot tag itself, and it shows only when nothing's passed. One component, multiple content zones. A layout component can expose several insertion points at once, each with its own name, header, footer, however many it needs. Template with a header title slots content into exactly that zone. It's how one layout component handles wildly different page content. The slot that hands data back up to the parent. Normally data flows down. Scoped slots flips it. The child exposes data through the slots, and the parent decided how to render it. The child owns the data, the parents owns the presentation. Powerful pattern. Slots can be as dynamic as everything else in Vue. Bind a slot's name to a variable and mix several named and scoped slots in one component. A tab system swapping which slot is active as you click through, or data table with fully customizable columns, both lean on this. Checking which slots were actually passed. Use slots is the composition API way to inspect a component's slots directly, not template needed. If slots footer lets you conditionally render a footer wrapper only when footer content was actually provided. Handy inside render functions or complex conditional layout. This section is Vue version of side effects, how you react to change, cache expensive work and reach outside your component. The property that's smarter than a method. Computed derives a value from other reactive state, and here's the key part. It caches the result. It only recalculates when a real dependency changes, not on every access. A plain method reruns every single time you call it. Computed remembers it. A computed value you can actually assign to. Pass get and set instead of plain function, and you get a computed property that can be written to. The setter decides how to write splits across whatever underlying state makes sense. Assign full name value and it updates first and last for you. React to a specific value changing. Watch runs a callback whenever count changes, handing you both the new and the old value. Watch a single source or an array of several. It's the explicit, opt-in way to run sides effect of a reactive state. You name exactly what to track. The watcher that tracks itself. Watch effect runs immediately and automatically figures out its own dependencies just from what it reads inside. No array to maintain by hand. Read 3 refs in the callback and all 3 are tracked. Change one, it reruns. Why isn't my watcher firing on the nested changes? Watch function is a shallow by default. It only notices when the whole object reference changes, not the property buried inside it. Add deep true to catch nested mutations, and immediate true to run the callback once right away, instead of waiting for the first real change. Your watchers don't run forever, unless you let them. Every watch or watch effect calls returns a stop function. Call it, and the watcher unsubscribes early. And timing matters. Watch post effects runs after the DOM updates. Watch sync effect runs on the spot. 3 variants, 3 moments in the render cycle. Every component has a life, created, updated, destroyed, and Vue gives you a hook for each moment that matters. The moment your component actually existed on screen. onMounted fires once right after the component's initial render lands in the real DOM. It's the go-to spot to fetch data, start a subscription, or grab a template ref to measure something. Before this hook, the DOM node genuinely doesn't exist yet. The hook that fires after every render. onUpdate runs after a reactive change causes a patch that the DOM's already updated. It's useful for reading post-update DOM state, but use it sparingly since it fires on every relevant change. Reach for watch instead if you are really reacting to a specific value. Your component's last chance to clean up. onMounted runs right before the component is removed from the DOM for good. Clear a set interval, remove an event listener, close a WebSocket, whatever you set up on mount. Tear it down here. Skip it and you've got a memory leak running in the background. The hooks that fire just before everything else. On before mount, on before update, on before unmount. Each fires right before its maintain counterpart, while you still have access to the old state of things. Rarely needed day to day, but essential when you need to compare before and after, not just react to after. Vue's version of React error boundary. On error captured, caches errors thrown everywhere in a distant component's render. Watchers or lifecycle hooks. Return false from it and the error stops propagation further up to the tree. One broken child component doesn't have to take down the whole page. Paused, not destroyed. When a component is cached by KeepAlive and the toggled out of the view, it isn't unmounted. It's paused. And on deactive fires. Switch back and on active fires instead of fresh mount. These are the resume and pause hooks for components that live inside the cache. Sometimes you need to escape Vue reactivity and touch the real DOM directly. Focus an input, measure a node, that's what template refs are for. Sometimes you need the actual DOM node. Put ref input on a template element and declare a same needed. Put ref input on a template element, declare a same name const input in a script, and after mount input value. You can call focus, measure its size, whatever the reactive system can do. It's a Vue escape hatch to the real DOM. A cleaner way to grab a template ref with use template ref input gives you an explicit function that returns a ref linked to a matching ref input in the template. No more relying on a Vue silently matching a variable name to a string. Same result as the classic pattern, just more explicit about the connection. What do you actually get when you ref a component? Put the ref on a component instead of a plain element and you don't get its internal DOM or state. You get whatever it chooses to expose and nothing more. Child form hands the parent a controlled, deliberate handle, not free access to the child's internals. Your script setup component is a locked box by default. Nothing inside it is visible to a parent ref unless you say so. Define expose focus, opt specific methods in explicitly. Everything else, internal refs, local state, states completely private. Encapsulation by default. This is the one thing in Vue that isn't reactive. Reading or writing a template refs doesn't trigger any re-render on its own. It's a pure escape hatch to the real DOM, sitting outside the reactivity system entirely. Same category as useRef in React. For the rare moments you genuinely need to touch the platform directly. This is Vue's biggest idea of the last few years. How you organize logic, share it and pass it around without prop drilling. Where the composition API actually started, setup was the original entry point, a function that runs before the component's created, returning whatever the template needs to use. It still works today, but script setup has mostly replaced it for the new code, since it removes all the manual return boilerplate. The single biggest quality of life upgrade in modern Vue. Every top-level binding, variables, functions, imports, it's automatically available in the template. No return count, and the end, no components registration. Write flat, plain code, and the compiler wires it all up for your behind the scenes. Two ways to write the exact same component. Options API groups a component by option type. All data together, all methods together. Composition API groups it by logical feature instead. Everything about one concern lives together. The compile to identical output. You will see Options API in older Vue code and that's completely fine. Vue's answer to React's custom hooks. A composable is just a useX function that bundles reactive state on a logic for reuse. UseMouse, useFetch, useToggle duplicates the same toggle logic in 3 components and it collapses into the one shared composable every one of them calls. That's the whole reuse story. Kill prop drilling for good. An ancestor components calls provide theme and any 5, 10, 15 layers down calls inject theme and gets it directly. No threading a prop through every component in between that doesn't even care about it. It's a Vue's version of React context. Why did my component just stop updating? The structure of a property of a reactive object with plain JavaScript. For example, const can't, and you get a dead disconnected number. The reactive link is gone the instant it's copied out. Use to refs or just reach for ref in the first place. You might not need a state library yet. A ref created outside any component at module scope inside the composable files becomes genuinely shared state. Every component that imports and calls that composable shares the exact same reactive value. It's a lightweight store and often all you need before reaching for Pinia. Now performance. How Vue avoids doing work it doesn't need to, and how much of that is already automatic. Ship less JavaScript automatically with defineAsync component. Splits that component into its own bundled chunk, loaded only when it's actually rendered. A heavy chart nobody scrolls to never gets downloaded. Zero manual bundler config. Vue and your build tool handle the splitting for you. Loading states without the mess of booleans. Suspense wraps a subtree with async dependencies, and async component, and async setup, and shows fallback content until every one of them is actually ready. One spinner, one wrapper instead of manual is loading flag scattered through every component involved. Stop your forms for resetting on every tab switch. KeepAlive wraps a dynamic component and caches inactive instances instead of destroying them. Switch away from a half-filled form and back and it's exactly as you left it. Scroll position, input values, everything. Without it, every tab switch is a fresh, empty mount. Not everything needs a deep reactivity. Shallow ref only tracks the top level. Nested objects inside aren't instrument at all. For a huge dataset, you replace wholesale rather than mutate deeply. That's dramatically cheaper than full reactive, wrapping every nested field. Reach for it on genuinely large data. Tell Vue never touch this object. Mark row permanently excluded an object from Vue's reactivity system, even if it later ends up nested inside a reactive object, perfect for third-party class instances that manages their own internal state and would just add overhead it wrapped in a proxy. Vue's been doing what the React compiler does. Since Vue 3.0, Vue's compiler analyzes your template and build time, tags every dynamic binding with a patch flag so the runtime knows exactly what might change, and hoists fully static nodes out of the render function, so they are created once, ever. No opt-in, no config, automatic on every build. Finally, the patterns that don't come up every day, but solve real problems when they do. Your model is trapped, and here's the one-line fix. A model nested deep inside the component with overflow hidden gets visually clipped no matter how high its z-index is. Teleport to body renders its content directly into body in the actual DOM, while staying logically part of the component tree. Instantly full screen, zero layout hacks. How tabs actually work under the hood? With component is current tab component renders whatever component that variable points to, in that exact spot. Change the variable, the rendered component swaps. It's the mechanism behind every tab system, every router-driven page swap, every dynamically composed form in Vue. Sometimes a template just can't express what you need. Use const vfocus with mounted elements, then use vfocus on any element and it autofocus the instant it mounts. Custom directives gives you lifecycle hooks for low-level imperative DOM behavior. The same category of the tool as vModel, but one you write yourself. Install a feature across your entire app in one line. A Vue plugin is just an object with install app function. It can register components, directives, or properties available on every component through app config global properties. App use my plugin call, and that capability is live application-wide. That's how the most Vue libraries hook in. You don't actually need a template. Underneath every template, Vue compiles down to calls on a H function that builds virtual nodes. You can write that directly or use JSX. For highly dynamic UI, a template static syntax can't express cleanly. Rare in a day-to-day view, but it's always there underneath. Smooth animations without touching a single class manually. Wrap a VueIf toggled element in transition, and Vue automatically applies enter-leave CSS transition classes at exactly the right moment. Transition group does the same for a whole v4 list. No manual timing, no set timeout, just CSS classes, Vue toggles for you. And one last sweep, everything that lives around Vue but isn't Vue itself. You will reach for those on almost every real project. A quick note, the stuff around Vue, not Vue itself. With a routing with Vue Router, statement management with Pinia, composable utilities with VueUse, an enormous library for read-made composables, the meta framework Nuxt for SSR and SSH, the build tool underneath all of it with Vite, testing with Vitest and VueTest utils, and full TypeScript support, generics and all right inside script setup. So here's the through line across all 73 concepts. Vue tracks reactivity at the property level, not the component level. Ref and reactive tracks individual values. Computed caches based on exactly what it reads. The compiler tags exactly what can change and hoists the rest. Every layer of this framework is built around updating precisely what changed. Nothing more and nothing less. And that's every core Vue concept in one map. The full list with these one-liners is pinned in the comments and in description. Thank you guys again so much for watching and hopefully see you in the next video.